start this dialogue with the High Representative of the European Union for External and Security Policy and Vice President of the Commission, Josep Borrell. We know each other since many, many years. We are young still, but we know as a lot of time ago. I will tell you in a few words the main aspects of Josep Borrell's CV and life. Josep Borrell is an economist and engineer. He was professor of economics in the Complutense University in Madrid and had other activities before becoming, as many of us in Spain at the beginning of the transition, he became a politician. He has been, he has a long career as a politician, but the main jobs he had as a politician was a member of the Spanish government, member of the parliament for many years. He was in the Spanish government, first of all, minister that we call Fomento, that is public works, infrastructures, and telecoms were under your responsibility also. And after he started a second political life in the EU, he became a member of the European Convention that prepared the failed constitutional treaty, transformed into the Lisbon Treaty. And after this work, that was very important at the time, he became a member of the European Parliament. And in the European Parliament, he was the president of the European Parliament during one mandate. At the end of his term as a European MP, he became chairman of the European Institute in Florence, and he came back to Spanish politics as Minister of Foreign Affairs during one mandate. 4 years, Giuseppe, or almost 4 years. And after was appointed High Representative and Vice President of the Commission. I don't know what was his idea about the content of this representative, but of course, I'm sure that he couldn't anticipate what is he doing nowadays. It's extremely relevant, extremely challenging, and at the same time, I hope, extremely interesting. But we are interested in hearing from him how he sees the present situation, the challenging situation, the worries about the Ukrainian war, the invasion of Ukraine by Putin forces, and how he sees the possibilities to achieve a peace as soon as possible and to develop strong cooperation from the European Union for the reconstruction of Ukraine and to make possible the European perspective of a democratic Ukraine. I am very happy that for the first time during his mandate here in Brussels, he visits CEPS, and I'm very glad to have him in this floor to illustrate us and to discuss with us and with the other participants in this debate organized by Stephen Blockmans, that is our Director of Research in charge, among other things, of external policy and security policy, and that will be the moderator after Josep Borrell speaks of our dialogue with our panelists and with some of you that for sure will want to put questions to him. Thank you very much, Josep, for being with us. I'm very glad to receive you here.
Well, thank you to all of you for being here and especially thanks to Joaquin. Joaquin was the youngest minister of the Felipe González government in 1982. Remember, Joaquin, when we won the elections? I still remember. It was a long time ago. 82 means, it means quite a lot of time. It's 40 years. And you were at that time the youngest minister of the Spanish government with Felipe González as a president. And Joaquin stayed for a long time in the government. I came later. We have been following the political life in the Socialist Party. And I think that we share something in common. We like to learn. We like to learn. We like to read. We are politicians, and we know that politics is not the moral. It's not the moral nor the science. But we want to understand things, and we have a certain pedagogical attitude to try to understand in order to be able to explain. And now, according with this tendency to a certain dimension of the intellectuality, Joaquin is chairman of this house, which is a cradle of intellectuality about the European Union, policies and future, and thanks to CEPS for your work. And I am in a place where I don't have a lot of time to think, neither to read. It's a very much frustrated, because every day you have in front of you big amounts of papers that you would like to read, and you cannot. And then you ask for a briefing, and then I have the chance of having a good team of people who work with me and with whom we exchange every day. And I try to write about what's happening. I don't have enough time to write everything, but this is a very nice intellectual exercise with you, Stephen and Fabian and others, to explain to each other what has happening, where I've been, with whom I've been talking, and to build a narrative. And the book we are presenting today, Staying the Course in Troubled Waters, is a little bit the narrative of 2021. What has happening in 2021 from my personal experience. Unhappily, the war finishes when the book finishes, when the war starts. And people open the book and say, where are the Ukrainian war? Well, it is for the next year book for 2022. But for 2021, we talk a lot about Russia, because many things has happened with respect to Russia during 2021, but not the Ukrainian war. We will talk a lot about Ukrainian war, for sure, even if it's not in the book. But I would like to stress important that for me, has this book, and I hope that maybe can be useful for many other people, mainly for the students or for historians, because in this book I collected a lot of writing, talking about a lot of things, how to relaunch the EU-US relations, how to defend the global commons, in particular climate, but not only climate, the power play that is taking place in the East with China, in the new battlefield, the Indo-Pacific, in a rhetoric way, battlefield, but at least a front line, revamping our strategy with Africa, the need to engage more and with the Indo-Pacific and Latin America, the story of the strategic compass, and how to boost the European defense capabilities, and also the relationship with Russia, because there are quite an important number of articles about what is happening with Russia before the start of the war. And then there are the geographical approaches, focusing on detail what's happening in Afghanistan. Nobody talks about Afghanistan, but remember, less than 1 year ago, in July, August, Afghanistan was the big news. And nobody talks about Afghanistan now. Nobody talks about Libya. But last year, we talked a lot about Libya. about Belarus. Remember last summer, Belarus. The Sahel, Ethiopia. Who's talking about Ethiopia? Nobody. But there, if we are worried about what's happening in Busha, we should be much more worried about what's happening in Tigray. But this disappeared from the front pages of newspapers, and the book talks about all these issues. What has happening during 2021, waiting for the big event that is shaking us, which is the war of Russia against Ukraine. So I hope we are not going to talk only about the last event, and try to bring a broader approach to how are we building the foreign policy of the European Union, foreign and security and defense policy. Because this job is a mixture of diplomatic activity and a kind of defense minister. The other day, Lavrov was blaming me and saying, Borrell should not forget that he is a diplomat, not a defense minister. Well, I am a little bit a defense minister too, because we are trying to build the defense capabilities of the European Union. And I've been talking about defense capabilities during the last month on writing this strategic compass, and mainly today with this clearinghouse where we try to match what Ukrainians request and what the member states are able to provide on warfare. So this is a complex job. When I went to the European Parliament hearing, they told me, are you aware that this is an impossible job? I was not as much as aware as I am today. It's not impossible, it is certainly difficult. And I couldn't imagine that it was going to be as much as difficult, because we had the COVID, and then we had a war. So of the horses of apocalypse, we have had two, the pest and the war. Let's hope that we are not going to have the other ones. But by the time being, I have to say it is a tremendously demanding job. It requires you 15 hours a day. Well, Joaquin knows that the job of commissioner is like this, but this especially because having one head in the council, another head in the commission, trying to manage the 27 member states, trying to manage the commissioner, trying to manage the commission and the council, the two pillars of the European Union, which is maybe the most important and difficult part of the job. So we are already 30 months in office and 3 months in war. The 24, the war started. I remember perfectly, 24 hours before the 24th of February, an American colleague phoned me saying, this is going to happen this weekend. And I told him, how do you know? Because you have been saying that for quite a number of times, and never happened. Well, this weekend for sure. And he was right. I went to bed, and at 5 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang, and he said, oh, the war has started, because nobody phones you at 5 o'clock in the morning otherwise. And certainly, the voice said, they have started bombing Kyiv. And 3 months later, they are still bombing, maybe not Kyiv, but a lot of Ukrainian cities, and they are destroying Ukraine. Literally, they are destroying Ukraine. They cannot conquer. They cannot take the surface, the space, the cities. The Putin's plan of let's take Kyiv in 15 days has not happening, but they are doing what the Russian army knows to do, to bomb, systematically destroying the cities without taking care of the civilian casualties and the pain they are inflicting care of the civilian casualties and the pain they are inflicting to this country. But I'm going to the Ukrainian war, and they said we should talk about many other things. But it's true that this war is a tectonic change in the geopolitical landscape. Europeans, we have learned or relearned the tragedy of the world, but we have also learned the importance of our unity. Without the European Union, without our unity, which would have been our answer to the war? Would have been able to put any sanctions to Russia? Certainly not. Would have been able to provide military equipment to Russia in the big amount that we are doing under a certain coordination from the Union? Certainly not. So the unity has been showing all the potential when we face a crisis. First was the pandemic, now is the war. The amount of the sanctions against Russia, we have been blocking more than 500 billion euros of Russian assets, shows that only through the unity of 27 member states, you can present such a strong stance in front of a power, a nuclear power, like Russia is. We are cutting our energy dependency from Russia. Would we have been able to make a plan in order to alleviate and cancel our strong dependency on Russian gas and oil, each European country alone? I doubt it. In any case, the geopolitical landscape has changed. Finland and Sweden will be members of NATO. I hope Erdogan will not be able to prevent it from happening. And we are facing a new economic crisis, which is going to be severe. Food and energy crises are rocketing. How do you say in English? Skyrocketing, like the rockets of the Russian army. And we are going to face a severe economic crisis, followed by a political crisis in many countries in the world, mainly in the poorest one, in Africa and in Latin America, for sure. The central bank will react, the interest rate will increase, inflation will have to be fight with another cure of low growth. So the economic landscape has also changed quite a lot. But we will go to that, I hope, on the colloquium, on the questions and answers. But don't wait for me to answer everything. I would like also to have your inputs, to have your advice. There are here eminent professors and intellectuals that can provide help, because I understand this is a collective exercise of common thinking. But let me give three ideas about how do we do foreign policy and what we should be able to do in order to improve our capacity to do foreign and security policy. I think that this sentence that I said during my hearing, Europe has to learn to use the language of power, which is a sentence that has been following me during these 30 months. Have you already learned to use the language of power? Some journalists ask me from time to time. Yes, a little bit. Yes, the idea of having power and using it has gone its way. The capacity of coercion, react against others according with our interest, not just using the soft power of trade and rule of law, but using a hard power, not necessarily military power, but hard, reacting with coercion, with someone that tries to attack you, like has been the case of China with respect to Lithuania. It's in a small case, but this is an exercise that Europeans have to learn. We have a lot of powers, but the problem is that we use them one by one. We work in silos, too much in silos. And to make the Council and the Commission to work together, overcoming the institutional quarrels, is something that also we have to learn if we want to be taken into consideration. We have done a lot in front of the Ukrainian war, using the language of power, but this is more than a concrete action, is a mindset, is a state of the mind. We were too comfortable under the American umbrella, decreasing our military expenditure, During 2008 and 2014, Europe has been through a silent process of disarmament, decreasing in a non-coordinated way our military capacities, and becoming an actor that could not pretend to be a geopolitical actor. In order to be a geopolitical actor, you have to be ready to use the power that can coerce the others, and not with the weakest one, because the temptation is to use the power against the weaker and not against the stronger. I could give some examples afterwards. But I think this is the most important thing that we have to learn. The second one is to take the initiative and to build coalitions. We talk all the time about like-minded countries, like-minded countries. This is one of the sentences that we use every day. We are strongly concerned, it's a typical sentence of the European Union. We are following closely, another one. And we work together with like-minded countries. Well, apart from that, which is the lesson that we are used to use, I think that we have to understand that we are a small part of the world, 5% of the world population, very old in average, and that we need to build coalition with others, not necessarily like-minded countries. Because if I only was talking with the people who are like-minded countries, my working day will finish at midday. I have to talk with a lot of people who are not like-minded countries. No? And in spite of that, I have to talk with them. And we should do it. And to build coalitions and to take initiative. We are in a reactive mode. What I've learned during these 30 months is that we are in a reactive mode. We react. We don't act. Yes, we act reacting. But there is a crisis, and then we act on the crisis. But we don't prevent the crisis from coming. We don't invest in crisis prevention. We do crisis management, often late, but we don't invest a lot on crisis prevention. And put an example, there is a crisis in the Sahel. We are being expelled from Mali, and we have been expelled from Central African Republic. But the crisis is looming in the Gulf of Guinea. We should act on the Gulf of Guinea now, before the crisis in the urgency obliges us to go quickly and late. So more reactivity and more capacity of work with people who don't think like us. Because there are an incredible amount of people that don't think like we think. And the war against Ukraine has shown it. We are very happy because 141 member states of the United Nations has been supporting us. But among them, there is Liechtenstein. And not among them, there is China and India. And instead of countries, you count people, then you will realize that more than half of the population of the world has not been supporting us or has not been condemning Russia. And this 141 is not a strong coalition. No, it's not a strong coalition. More and more people are sensitive to the Russian narrative, echoed by China very effectively, and we have to take very much care, because if things continue like this, we will lose the battle of narrative. And this is the third line of action, to build a narrative, to have a story to tell. We, the politicians, are storytellers, and we try to win the spirit of the people by telling them a story. The politics is a little bit a theater. And here in the European institutions, we are too much technocratic. We don't touch the emotions. We don't have a narrative. Because we have been used to try to solve political problems through technocratical procedures. And what matters is the procedure, maybe more than the output. And I think that we have to rethink our mindset and to be storytellers. The Russians are storytellers. They have a factory to tell stories. They have a real factory, trolls, farms of trolls, invading the cyberspace with stories, what we call disinformation. And in this battle of narrative, they are very much effective. You cannot imagine how many people in the world believe that the price increases on food and energy are the consequences of our sanctions. Not the consequences of the war itself, but of our sanctions. And this is not the illiterated people, like the poor African boy who is in the streets of Bamako with a cartoon saying Putin has saved the Donbass and now he will save us, but much more cultivated, educated people, like foreign ministers of important countries, who expand this narrative. I don't know if they believe it or not, but they use it. They tell the story. When the pandemic came, it was the first battle of narrative. Remember when we start thinking and saying in the first book, the battle of generosity. Who is the good guy of the film? Who provides masks? Who provides vaccines? Vaccine diplomacy, mass diplomacy, and you will see now the wheat diplomacy. The Russians have already been saying, our wheat for our friends. They said that for the mask and for the vaccines first. So we are in a battle in order to try to influence people, not only with goods and arms, but with a narrative. And at the end, maybe the narrative is the currency of the global power. If you don't have a good story to tell, then you will lose. And we Europeans, we had a fantastic story to tell. Peace. Our story was to say nevermore. And we tell this story each other. And the generations that were maybe our fathers and our generation, when Joaquin and I, we were trying to push Spain inside of the European Union, we were building Europe with the banner of peace. And this is a remarkable success, extraordinary success that we should not underestimate, because the war disappeared from our imagination, from our collective imagination. When one of the fathers said, make the war impossible among us, we made the war mentally impossible among us. It's mentally impossible for a German or a French student to think that they are going to kill their friend that they met on the Erasmus last summer. And this is an extraordinary advantage, a big success on the humankind story, and the European story mainly. The problem is that this story is no longer an engine. It's no longer something that moves. Yes, peace, okay. What else? We have peace. And so, well, two things. First, don't believe that the peace is the natural state of things. The natural state of things is war. And we in Europe, we have been accustomed to believe that peace is the normal state. And I hope that we are not going to learn that this is not the case. And second, peace among us, yes. But we live in a world which is not in peace. A very dangerous world. And Europeans don't want to know that they live in a dangerous world. They do like these big birds that put their head inside the sand. They don't want to understand the world, how dangerous it is. And part of our work is to make them understand and to explain how the world is. And that's what the Strategic Compass wanted to do. An analysis of the threats and challenges that European society are facing, in plural, all together. We don't have the same understanding of the threats, for sure not. In Lithuania, the Russian threat is much more evident than in Lisbon, for sure. And in Sevilla, the immigration and African problems are much more evident than in Finland. But we have to share, to have a common strategic culture if we want to survive, And this is the thing that I learned more in these 30 months. That if the European civilization, because we are a civilization, wants to survive, has to be more united and more aware of how the world works. Who drives the world? The new emerging powers. The new fight for who is the most efficient political system. We are so much convinced that our democracy, our liberal democracy, our market economy is the best one, that we believe that everybody believes it. And the ones that they don't enjoy it, they would like to be in a system like us. Well, it's not so sure. Sorry, I'm saying tough things, but the Chinese, the Russians know, because Russia cannot be presented as a model for anything, not even for the military capacity. But the Chinese are explaining to the world that their system is much more efficient. Look at me, in 40 years, what they done. Look at me. And I can help you to do as I did. And here am I with the Belt and Road, with my loans, with my technological capacity, with my political influence. Which is the model that the African will follow? Africa with soon 2,500 million people. Which model Africa will follow? It's not so clear and not so sure that they will be following our political system. And this is certainly a big challenge for us. So with this book and with my work and the work of everybody who works with me and the External Action Service, I think that we have to engage more on this pedagogic activity in order to make the Europeans aware of the world in which they are living. We are such an extraordinary exception in the world that we should try to defend it. And it has a price. And it has a price. Are we ready to pay the price? I don't know. This is maybe one of the questions that we should discuss. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Borrell. You've characterized the invasion of Russia in Ukraine as a tectonic shift in not just European but world politics and in history. And of course, the question that would entertain minds here in the European Union is whether the European Union as a collective can meet this moment of history. You referred to unity between the member states. At the same time, we see already divisions opening up. Before even you arrived to Brussels, you were talking about the Valley of Tears. That is the Council, the Foreign Affairs Council. Of course, now you conduct the Common Foreign and Security Policy of the European Union, permanently chair. It is still a Valley of Tears. Good. Well, not so good, but it clearly shows the limits that the EU as a collective is up against, especially when it concerns economic coercion, as you mentioned, which should be applied in a more integrated fashion. Still, when we look 3 months on from the invasion, it seems that in security and defense policy in particular, some advances have been made. Of course, plans have been made throughout the European history in this field, and these plans have come and gone again. So the question is, what will stay this time? What is different in security and defense policy? Will it change methodologies, the way that member states cooperate in this area?
Well, I will be happy if only what's happening is an incentive to implement the strategic compass. The strategic compass was produced and published and approved just before the war, but the war has just certified how important it is to do what we were planning to do. So I don't think we have to invent the wheel again. We have the wheel. Let's make the wheel turn. Because the strategic compass has 80 actions scheduled on time, and what we should do is to speed up the implementation of these actions. not to build a new consensus going deeper in theory, on paper, but going in practical terms on doing what we agreed to do. It would be quite enough. It would be quite enough. I don't need to go further on proposals. I want to go quicker on the implementation of the agreements done 1 week before the war. Let's see if we are really able to invest more in defense in a coordinated manner, which is quite difficult to do. But if everybody increases the military expenditure, each member state, multiply by X the military expenditure, keeping the same structure, and on a homeopathic way, pumba, everybody is increasing, the result will be a big waste of money, because we are going to increase our duplications, and we are going to not to diminish our gaps. But I know how difficult it is to make the 27 defense ministers agree on a coordinated way of developing their military capabilities, as much as difficult as it was when we created the euro to make the monetary policy of member states be into the tunnel. Remember the snake in the tunnel? Now we have to have some kind like this, a kind of a snake in the tunnel of the military capabilities.
And do you believe this is realistic?
No.
Why not?
Realistic. It is voluntaristic. It will require a lot of will. It will not happen alone. There is no law of gravity to make things happen. You will have to engage, member states will have to engage a lot on it. And taken seriously, the European Defence Agency products explaining, we know we are our gaps. We know we are our duplications. It's a matter of will to try to act in a coordinated manner. If this war is not a wake-up call, then which will be the right wake-up call? We should learn from this war. Look, the European armies couldn't maintain a war like the one in Ukraine for more than 2 weeks. They run out of ammunition. Let's start by this.
So you're skeptical whether this will be a game changer, whether indeed this has been a wake-up call?
Well, I accumulated a certain degree of skepticism after 40 years of being in politics. But what I want to tell you, it is a matter of will. It's a matter of will. We know what to do. We know what to do. It's a matter of willing to do it. And this is the heads of state and the government. No one else can do it.
Point taken. I would like to bring in our other panelists, both here in Brussels as well as online. First, Anu Bradford, who's zooming in, I assume, from New York. Of course, there you're director of the European Legal Studies Center at Columbia Law School. I hope you're still with us. An author of the famous OUP book, The Brussels Effect. There's Stefan Lehne here on the podium with us, who's visiting scholar at Carnegie Europe and former Director General for Political Affairs at the Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also having served here at the Council of the EU as Director for the Balkans, Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And we have two more speakers coming in a bit later after our panel debate. Maya Yahya, who's also zooming in from the US, Director of Carnegie in Lebanon, and Raja Mohan, who's currently Director of the Asia Society Policy Institute in New Delhi. So welcome to all of you. Anu, I would like to start with you. You famously touted the Brussels effect to point to EU leadership in rule setting around the world. And I just wonder, looking at external action a bit wider than the discussion we've had, primarily focused on common foreign and security policy and security and defense policy, is what you make of this geopolitical commission halfway through?
So thank you so much for the invitation, and good afternoon, everyone. Delighted to be part of the conversation. Let me first thank High Representative Borrell for the extremely astute remarks. I take a lot of comfort in how clear-eyed you are about the situation and the challenges that are facing Europe right now. So if I say a word about where my own scholarship on European power fits in today's geopolitical world, I would first say that the power comes in many dimensions, and they're all important for different reasons. And I've often written about how the EU is not a geopolitical power, but how it is indeed a regulatory power, and how meaningful that is in influencing the everyday lives of all of us around the world. So in that sense, I think the Brussels effect remains as relevant as ever, and this Commission has really shown that. If you look at some of the priorities of this Commission, which is climate change and also digital transformation, we are seeing tremendous leadership. That is not just leadership for Europe, but leadership for the world. So if I say just a couple of examples of the digital economy, the ambitious regulatory proposals on Digital Markets Act or Digital Services Act or artificial intelligence, or then the regulation of platform workers, those all are examples of what the entire world is trying to do. There's no really, I think the High Representative's remarks show well, there's very few issues that the world leaders agree on, but they do agree that the big tech should not be the one governing the world. It should still be the governments that are in charge. And Europeans have provided a global blueprint on how to do that. And there, I think there's also a geopolitical dimension, because we have a few alternative sort of ways to think about governing the digital economy. And one is the American model, where we really leave it for self-regulation of the companies, which is the market-driven model. And in many ways, I think I'm comfortable saying today that that model has failed. Even Americans themselves don't believe that the tech companies should be in charge. But there's enough political dysfunction that the Americans have not been able to really revise their own regulatory model, but they are relying on Brussels generating the rules that will govern their tech companies and give their citizens greater privacy and greater protections when they are engaging online. But there is a challenge that Europeans are facing, which is the Chinese model, the state-driven regulatory model that is based on digital authoritarianism. Mr. Borrell talked about the narratives, the stories they tell. There are stories they censor and propaganda that they replace it with, and digital surveillance in a way that is not just confined to China, but that is being exported all around the world. So in today's world, it is important that the European vision for the digital economy will indeed prevail. I do have two concerns, though, if I look at this Commission's era and the last couple of years of the Brussels effect. So one is that I worry about the EU overdoing it, and the second, I worry about the EU underdoing it. My concern about overdoing it relates to this conversation about strategic autonomy, digital sovereignty, especially advocated by Commissioner Breton. And I do not disagree that we need to be strategically more autonomous, or we need to be digitally more sovereign. But our strength is our commitment to economic openness. And I do not believe that protectionism and industrial policy is Europe's path for success. And here, I will also want to remind you that the Brussels effect is a tool to export good and bad regulations alike. And if Europe turns protectionist, it will take the world with it. And that does not serve the interest of the Europe either. My other concern is that the EU will underdo it. So not only that it would geopoliticize regulation and become protectionist, but it is just not effectively enforcing that vision that it has articulated, not just for Europe, for the rest of the world. We can look at the GDPR that has become the global standard, but our record of showing whether it really brings about more privacy is somewhat debatable. The same thing if you look at the amount of disinformation and hate speech theories online, the DSA has a lot of work to do to actually change that. And there, if we look at how China is now cracking down on its tech sector, we may soon be able to tell the story that yes, the authoritarians can tame the big tech. Few of us believe that China will lose to the tech companies, but we are not yet sure whether we have managed to show that democracies can craft democratic governance models that can also rein in the tech companies. And that is another narrative. That's the story that we do want to tell, that there is a way to do it in a way that is a victory for democracy and victory for individual rights. And there's nobody else that is leading that the way the EU can lead. Let me now expand it just with a few words that if I look at the time I wrote about the Brussels effect, I argued that the regulatory power relative to other forms of power can matter even more. And there the world has changed. The geopolitical power and hard power matters much more today than we thought that it mattered a few years ago. So in that sense, I would say that even those of us who write about European influence and power and relevance for living were taken by surprise with how Europe responded to the Russian invasion. The severity, the comprehensiveness of the sanctions, the European unity, at least initially, to come together and cooperate with partners like the United States in responding in a very firm fashion was something that is nothing short of impressive and unprecedented. And I really want to commend High Representative for your role in that important endeavor. I do agree, though, that some challenges remain. So the European unity is absolutely key, and it will be hard to sustain it. If we think about the energy prices, we think about inflation, we think about the long-term cost of resettling and integrating the refugees, the continuing needs for transfer payments and solidarity that is being needed. So in many of these issues, we also at the same time need to push for more Europe and more integration in the midst of these resentments and concerns. We need more cooperation when it comes to foreign and security policy, in energy, in health. So the list just goes on. And we also face the external challenges. So I wouldn't underestimate the risk of the next US elections, and Europeans cannot be at the mercy of the American dysfunctional democracy every 4 years. There are many risks with the continuing assertive, increasingly authoritarian China and its tense relations with the US. And I think this was something that I really appreciate High Representative mentioned, is that we cannot just work with the like-minded countries because there are fewer like-minded countries today. And that is one distinction. If you look at the way the Americans are fighting this war of different systems, there has been more of a commitment to draw the line. Are you with us? Are you against us? Are you democracy? And there are lots of countries that might be choosing China, especially if America, for instance, does not show its continuing commitment to openness, but is more inward-looking, more protectionist as well in its orientation. So I believe that the challenges that you outline regarding the language of power, the many dimensions of power, the need to work with allies like-minded, but also with those countries that don't share all the European values, and the importance of really telling the story. The narrative. And I think we cannot let anybody forget the European story, the history, or rewrite that story. But right now, this commission, including you, High Representative, in the position that you hold, is writing the story for future generations. And it is so important to get that story right. And I must say that I have the faith that you have the courage and the conviction and the utmost care in taking on that not impossible, but extremely hard and extremely important task that is now lying ahead of us. So I think today leadership matters more than ever. And I really have all my success wishes in rooting for you in the job that you right now have. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anu. One might almost say with the title of the book, Staying on Course in Troubled Waters. Would you like to immediately react to one or two points, or shall we collect a few more impressions?
Much better to listen.
Okay.
Distinguished panel of people that have with us.
Fantastic. Stefan, Mr. Borrell has talked about conflict prevention and the need to do much more about it. With all people's minds being focused on Ukraine, one might be perhaps forgiven not to think too much about the Western Balkans, but we both know that that is a flaw, perhaps, of political attention span and media coverage. I wanted to touch upon the Balkans in particular, and perhaps you can make the connection with the war in Ukraine. But I also wanted to tease you a little bit about some more institutional issues, and the fact indeed that the current governance system in foreign policy has been around now for more than 10 years with the Lisbon Treaty. And as we ourselves have reported on the EES 2.0 project, which was led by Pierre Vimont, a colleague of yours, and there is lots of scope for improvement in the governance model. So I would like you to maybe share a few thoughts on those 2 points, if you will.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I think probably the High Representative was absolutely right. The response of Europe to the Russian aggression against Ukraine was one of the big success stories, no doubt about it. It showed a coherence and a determination that we've rarely seen before. And it's even more remarkable because the EU was deeply divided on Russia just a few months earlier. I think we had two external helpers. One was Vladimir Putin, who did something so aggressive and so unacceptable that even the most pro-Russian European government fell into line. And the other great helper was, of course, President Biden, because on this issue, different from other issues, the Americans showed really strong leadership and worked extremely well with the European institutions in keeping everyone together. We can't rely on this staying the way that with every week the collateral damage of the war becomes greater in terms of inflation, in terms of negative economic consequences. And some of the old divisions are reappearing. So to maintain the positive momentum requires a lot of leadership here. And we really need to, from day to day, work in keeping everyone together because the centrifugal forces are unfortunately already there. The negative story, from my point of view, is the Western Balkans, because I've worked on this issue for 9 years with Javier Solana. I worked quite hard, up to the point of burnout almost. And then I, for a long time, haven't focused on it again. But now when I look at the region, the real shock for me is how little I missed in terms of developments. I think the prevailing mood in the region is frustration and anger and disappointment. And I think the EU, in a way, didn't keep its eyes on the ball as far as the Western Balkans is concerned. There were too many crises distracting us from the region. And the enlargement process lost its credibility, and without a credible enlargement, also the unfinished political business did not move forward. And now I think we're in a very interesting stage, because if we take the Ukraine war as another big distraction, I think the region will deteriorate further and quite significantly, because also the Russians will do everything they can to make our work more difficult in the region. But if we take, we have now 3 additional candidates basically for membership. So if we take this as an occasion to really rethink enlargement in a very significant way, look at the structures, etc., turn it into something new, then this could benefit, I think, both regions, the Western Balkans and also Eastern Europe. Now, I have to apologize because now I'm turning to something the High Representative doesn't like, procedures, basically. I very much admired the strategic compass. I think it was an excellent initiative to develop our instruments in the area of security and defense in a more credible way. And it's an excellent paper. And my point would be that we need a similar process for foreign policy, because the arrangements that we have in place are the Lisbon arrangements. They are 11 years old, and they were developed in a very benign environment, basically. Now the world has changed, and I think one should really think whether the instruments that we have in this field of diplomacy are up to scratch. And I give you just 3 points, basically short points of possible improvements that I can think of. The first one is a very banal one. It's majority voting. This has been discussed since we have the CFSP for the last 30, 40 years almost, and nothing ever has moved forward. Now it's one of the key demands of the Conference for the Future of Europe. And again, if you talk to Brussels insiders, like the people here in the room, they will be very cynical, say, oh, it's impossible, it will never happen. But I find this quite puzzling, I must say, because if you look at the last decades, the EU has moved from unanimity to majority voting in many fields. And some of the fields are no less sensitive than foreign policy. We have made this transition at the point when the collective interest in more effective action outweighed the interest of individual states to be able to block. And if we are not now at this point now in foreign policy, we will never be. So I do know, of course, there will be a lot of resistance. That it's a real need for leadership on this, but it's a fight worth fighting. And I would encourage the High Representative to engage in this fight, to move it forward. It goes without treaty change. This can be done through decisions of the European Council. By unanimity. That is, of course, the problem. But yes, yes, yes.
Well, in a way, that there are several escape routes right. out of the unanimity requirement.
We have the constructive
abstention, for example, which has only been used once for Cyprus, by Cyprus, to allow the CSDP mission to...
And we also have the possibility of a state going to the European Council if it feels that vital interests are at stake. So I think with a little bit of push and leadership, not just from the institutions, but also from the member states who are interested in a more effective foreign policy, we can possibly move this forward. The second point relates to something that is in your book. I think you stressed very much the problem that we have, the fragmentation of our policies, the fragmentation of our power. And you stress very much that what we need is much stricter, tighter coordination across the policy fields. We need to put all the instruments together behind a coherent strategy, right? And I absolutely agree with this. I think what we need now, because the real asset of the EU is its economic power. We have to leverage the economic power to protect our interests, but also to pursue our foreign policy goals. And my belief is that the only institution that has the kind of expertise and clout to do so is really the European Commission. So I personally feel, and I know this is a very personal thought, that we would gain a lot of synergy and effectiveness if we would merge large parts of the EES into the Commission, under the wise leadership of the High Representative, Vice President of the Commission. I think that would really create a lot more possibility, a stronger position of the Commission to do this coordinating work. And of course, the member states diplomats should be still involved in it. We can be doing it.
Theoretically, I am the Vice President of the Commission.
Yes, yes.
I don't have to move to the Commission because I am the Commission, theoretically.
Yeah, but still, I think there is a little bit of duplication still there, and I think that would make it easier if you can sort of unify it. The third and last point relates to the European Council.
Explain me. Let's be a little bit interactive. What would change? I am the Vice President of the Commission. I have services who depend from me. And now, what has to be moved to the Commission?
I can tell you, for instance, from many talks with heads of delegations, that in some delegations it works quite well, this interaction between the political part and the economic part, the Commission part. In many other delegations, a bit of an apartheid system. They're not really working very well together. And I understand that, for instance, if the External Action Service produces a paper, it has to be approved by the Commission as a whole. But if the Commission does something on the external arrangement, it's not coordinating with the EES. So I think that would be a point in simplifying the issue a bit. But let me make the last point very quickly. I think a lot of decision-making on foreign policy has moved to the European Council. That's natural. It's also in the member states, the prime ministers have become more important in foreign policy. But the European Council approaches foreign policy a little bit in a, well, less than perfect way. It's mostly in a crisis management mode. There are not many strategic discussions. Sometimes it's crowded out by urgent other business. I believe that it would be good to have part of the EES basically turned into some kind of National Security Council like in Washington, devoted to supporting the foreign policy work of the European Council. It would have two functions basically. One is strategic advice to the European Council based on all the information that comes from the system, basically from the intelligence cell, from the delegations, from the operations, etc. I believe that the European Council would make better decisions on foreign policy if there would be a common collective basis of analysis when they start to discussing these issues. And the second point would be as a coordination function, because I think the member states will continue to have their own diplomacy alongside the common diplomacy of the European Union. But on issues that are very important for the EU, there is a case for much stronger coordination, basically between the institutions, but also with the member states. And I think such an element would really help the process along. So these are just three ideas. They're not necessarily very good ones. Other people will have other ideas. So my only message to you is that I believe it might be time to think of a process of, in a way, rethinking the way we deploy our resources in the foreign policy field.
That's the time to rethink, yes.
I would like to, you appealed, Mr. Borrell, to the need for a narrative, basically, to tell Europeans how the world works. We've invited Maha and Raja to tell us how they see the Union operating in the regions that they know best. Maha, of course, Middle East with Syria, 10 years on, we still a need for a political solution, I suppose, as has been suggested. Israel-Palestine, is the EU there? Lebanon, the country you know best, has hit rock bottom, is trying to get back to the surface. Libya was mentioned, of course, as a crossroads. EU-Turkey relations. Where is the EU in all of this? Is the EU a bystander or not?
Hi, everybody, and hello, your High Commissioner. Thank you for the presentation, and I very much enjoyed reading the book, but I also very much agreed with much of what you said. In short, it's not really just a bystander. No, it's very much there, but it's the EU is perceived as a weaker part of the link, if you like. I mean, I very much concur with High Commissioner Borrell's argument that the battle of narratives is incredibly important, especially when it comes to speaking to power. But beyond the narrative, there are hard realities that are used to actually bolster false narratives that we're trying to fight against. In the Middle East and North Africa, for example, the issue of security is really paramount. But when we talk about security, we talk about hard security. We talk about conflict. Where the EU really has played an incredibly important role is on the humanitarian front. It hasn't really been able to push forward in any shape or form issues related to the resolution, as you mentioned, a political resolution to the Syrian conflict, which is now a decade old and which has caused 6 million refugees, 6.7 internally displaced. Europe has bore the brunt of this crisis, but so have neighboring countries. The role here Europe has been playing, or the EU, is very much on the humanitarian front, which is desperately needed. But on the political front, often it feels as if it's somehow missing in action. There isn't a sense that there is a kind of concerted and agreed upon approach towards, for example, the crisis in Syria and how to resolve this. Just even in the humanitarian field, in terms of countries that want to kind of normalize with the regime of Bashar al-Assad and others that don't. So in this sense, this kind of fragmentation or fragmented approach to, or what is perceived as a fragmented approach, has had a negative impact in terms of how the EU is perceived in the region. I think also this kind of applies also to questions of food security, energy security, questions of climate change, questions of health. These are all fundamental parts of the security climate in the region, all critical issues that are being addressed, but again, in a piecemeal manner. And I think the concern is that with the Ukraine crisis, these issues have become a lot more critical. Just to give an example, countries and citizens in the MENA are of two minds about the Russian invasion of Ukraine and how the West has handled this crisis, namely the US and the European Union. On the one hand, there is a lot of sympathy with the plight of Ukrainians. There was a lot of solidarity when the invasion began by Syrians, for example, many of whom survived Russian Syrian bombardments of their own cities. But there's also a lot of skepticism and anger with what is perceived as double standards. And again, this is also part of the narrative, whether it's in the media coverage, these refugees look like us or they don't, how the refugees were received. And then for Gulf countries in particular, coming back to the issue of security, the sense that the US pivot away from the region, and in some ways, European disengagement on that front has meant that they needed to search for other security guarantees from other countries. So when it came to taking up a position on the invasion of Ukraine, many of them were hedging their bets and continue to hedge their bets and are trying to avoid taking clear sides. And I can give plenty of examples. Now, the question to my mind is, with the looming global economic crisis that is coming, the persistence of conflicts that are just only going to expand and get worse. Humanitarian needs in the region are only going to expand with what we're expecting, the global inflation we're expecting, the shortages, food shortages, etc. In addition to ongoing conflicts, my question is, how do you use the language of power to push for solutions on Iran, the JCPOA? We haven't talked about Iran, for example. I know that the EU is trying to push for the JCPOA to be finally signed. But again, it's not clear whether that is going to take place or not. But signing the JCPOA is going to have ripple effects in other areas. It's going to have negative effects on the security, on other aspects of security in the region. So if this is not tied into a mechanism that looks at for example, Iran's regional activities through its different proxy groups, then we kind of put a Band-Aid, or we deal with one problem and then ignore other sides of the problem. The same with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the ongoing Syrian strategy. So my question to you, Your Excellency, is what role do you see for the EU? Is there a chance of putting together a more a cohesive and maybe strategic perspective on how to deal with the multiple dimensions of security, but also crisis in the Middle East and North Africa? One is that is coherent and where the different parts speak to each other, so that policies in one arena do not negatively impact goals that you have, such as, for example, respect for human rights, or other goals that you have in other arenas.
Thanks very much, Maha.
There is another one, no?
Yes, and then I will put it back to you, Mr. Borrell. But
it's very interesting what they are saying, no?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very good. I hope you're taking note, and will respond also in kind, of course.
I will not have response for everything, but.
Raja, can we turn to the Indo-Pacific, which was referred to as a rhetorical battlefield? Does Europe matter in the Indo-Pacific?
I hope it does, because for many of us in Asia, a strong Europe, a geopolitical Europe, a Europe that can deal with the more complex issues of the world is very welcome. I mean, because for us, given the challenges that we confront today, having a strong Europe that can take care of itself and contribute to security elsewhere would be very greatly welcome. But here are the problems. I mean, and the good news and the bad news. The good news is such a delight to listen to High Representative Borrell, who's really, I think, has sought to change the discourse in Europe from the self-description as an empire of norms, as a regulatory power, to one asking Europe, exhorting Europe to actually learn the language of power, to recognize that the world there is evil and that evil has to be dealt with. And much of what he has said in his speeches in 2021, and have actually, I think, at least mentally should have prepared Europe to deal with what happened in 2022, which is the war in Ukraine and the importance of dealing with it for Europe. So while I really endorse all that the High Commissioner, High Representative has said, but I also despair at three broad issues, three broad questions. One, this idea which the book talks about, that there is a postmodern peace garden in Europe and there is a jungle growing outside. But what Ukraine tells us, the jungle is in Europe as well. That this is not, Europe is not separate. A poor, happy Europe has to deal with a bad rest of the world. I don't think that is the problem. Europe has its own problems, and I think it's important to recognize those, and that a Europe that contributes to the world can also help solve its own problems. Therefore, I think it must be seen as a much deeper, interconnected set of issues. I don't know if Europe is really ready to do that. The second, I think, is for all the action in last 3 months in Europe, is it very clear that Europe can actually deal with the challenges ahead, because there are emerging divisions? And more deeply, is it simpler for Europe to follow the American lead rather than trying to construct a framework? For all the talk about Trump might come back, the deep state in the Anglo-American world has been much ahead of Europe in recognizing the problem of Russia, in warning against the challenges of China, and the importance of dealing with this in a far more muscular way. And Europe is really playing catch up rather than actually deal with it. Now, given the internal differences, can the Europeans really construct can the Geopolitical Commission really produce a coherent European doctrine? I think there are a whole range of problems. So I think that's really what worries us, that actually can Europe do this, or it'll simply go back to following the US, or they're going to be fragmentation in Europe, that parts of it really taking the lead with Europe. That brings me to the third question, which is really the economic power of Europe, which is real and considerable. But harnessing that economic power seems to me constrained by the geographic interdependence with Russia and the mercantile interdependence with China. Therefore, if there is geopolitical questions to be dealt with, while the logic of your economic policies are really about engaging more deeply with the Russian market and the Chinese market, can that be walked back? I mean, while we talk about energy dependence being reduced, while Chinese market are being dealt with far more geopolitically, is it really possible? Do all parts of Europe actually agree with that proposition that you can, simply ignore these markets or simply reduce the dependence and turn to the others? So those, I think, are the questions. As I said, look, for us in Asia, a strong Europe that takes care of itself, let me reaffirm that, will make it a lot easier for us to deal with the security problems. That a US, that the better burden sharing in the European security between US and Europe, will allow Europe, will allow the US to do a lot more in Asia. And it'll also, the capabilities that are going to be created collectively in Europe, a large part of them can also be deployed to the Asian periphery of Europe. So therefore, we wish Europe well. And Mr. Borrell has really raised the level of discourse, which is very welcome. But I continue to despair, is Europe really up to it?
Thank you very much, Raja. And for the benefit of the discussion here, just a couple of synthetic points, perhaps. Europe is needed in the Indo-Pacific, if only as a sort of balancing power. Second point, Europe tends to yourself before helping others. Is it perhaps, and that was a question, easier to follow the lead of the US, irrespective of the political winds that might change in the White House? And then China as a divisive factor in economic relations with member states. I think you've heard from different perspectives, whether it is from the variegated expressions of European power, regulatory power, that's what Anu Bradford was, of course, talking about. The Brussels effect is still there, but it needs to be used constructively, I suppose, to shore up multilateralism for a rules-based international order in the future. Stefan's points, the connections between Ukraine and the Balkans, and thank you, Stefan, for making the plea for staged accession as a methodology, perhaps, to unlock benefits earlier to applicants and candidate countries whilst they perform or whilst they work for accession. And of course, the institutional revision that you pleaded for, Stefan, and then the points from the Middle East, of course, which are in need of a strategic rethink, more comprehensive in nature, recognizing the trade-offs across the board, and be more cohesive as a factor. And then the points I just synthesized on Indo-Pacific. Some reflections still from your side before closing, because I know that you have a hard exit fairly soon, but they would be very welcome.
I'm trying to digest all the amount of ideas and considerations that our panelists has been presented today. I said at the beginning, and it was not a rhetorical sentence, that is a collective exercise. It's not me who comes here to be burned by questions impossible to answer, but to exchange and to reflect and to consider the complexity of the issues in which we are facing. And thank you for your contributions. It's impossible to digest and to answer immediately, but I keep many of your ideas, and my team for sure will make me a report, and we'll try to think about it later. But allow me to try to say something. First, your book, The Russell's Effect, gave a big burst to the European bureaucracy. They were very happy to be recognized that they count, and the Brussels has capacity. We don't want to use the word power, but has capacities to influence the world. And certainly we had more than we have, because we have been the standard setters, but we have been the standard setters because we have been the technological leaders. If you are not the technological leader, you will not be the standard setter. And we have been losing this technological leadership in many fields. And in the fields in which we have been losing the technological leadership, we have been losing the capacity of setting the rules. Certainly, the ones who set the rules has the power. You will behave like this. This is the rules. You have to do things like this. And the object that you produce has to follow these characteristics. This is my standard, you have to follow it. But today, China it's going ahead of our standards. They have developed, all the GAFA has a Chinese alternative. China has its own internet, and I wonder if Chinese will be very much worried by our normative capacities. If we continue losing the front line of the technological innovation, we will be losing this capacity of setting standards and so enjoying the power that it gives to you if you're able to put the norms. So yes, we are still a norm setter, we are still an important regulator power, but take care, because if we continue to this trend, we will eat less and less. And secondly, not everything is about regulation. Regulation is good when people follow the rules. But in a world where people don't follow the rules, the regulation are a little bit useless. No, the regulation capacity doesn't help me to keep my boot in the ground in Mali. It doesn't help me to talk with the Mali junta and discuss with them which is the condition for me to stay in there and to have the control of a territory, which is a cradle of dangers for us. Regulation is good if people follow the rules. If people decided not to follow the rules, then the regulation is less useless. And more, we are in a world where some people don't follow the rules and others build their own rules. And that's why I think that we have to do two things. One is to fight, to be in the forefront of the technological development. Maybe in some fields it's going to be too late. Then we have to jump over some steps in development and go to the next generation. And in another fields, others will mark the regulations, like it or not. Others will be as much as powerful as we have been until now. But certainly, this is our most important power, is the capacity to rule, the rule of law. This is our our IDN, no? The rules. We believe in a rule-based order. The rules, the state of the law. This is our origin. And this has kept us afloat. But in the world in which we are living, this will not keep us afloat. We need more. We need more apart from regulations, and we need to fight with other regulation powers. About we are a strange animal, and you know, we are a strange animal. We have two pillars, the governments and the commission, the communitarian and the intergovernmental. And the foreign policy, strictly sensus, the hard foreign policy, remains a competence of the member states. One thing is to have external relations, and another thing is have a foreign policy. Foreign policy is a matter of a state. The Commission has external relations because it has policies, has an external dimension, and it has to be in relation with others. So it has external relations. But foreign policy, on the hardcore of the foreign policy, it remains a competence of the states, like it or not. And that's why there is a Foreign Affairs Council, and the convention wanted to create someone who has one foot on the council and another foot in the commission in order to make, to merge the external relations of the commission with the foreign policy of the states. Because where is the border between one thing and the other? No? Well, there is no border, there's this interlink. And this is the interest of the job. No? But it has its difficulties because to be two heads, maybe sometimes you don't have any head. That's the problem, that people in the council believe that you are from the commission and people from the commission believe that you are from the council. And you have to be both at the same time. And it's not an easy job, but someone has to try to do it. And then don't forget that there is someone called the President of the European Union Council, which was created after the convention. When we imagined the High Representative Vice President, in the agenda was not the figure of the President of the European Union Council. It came later. It came afterwards. And the one, according with the treaty, who is in charge of representing the Union in the world is the President of the European Union Council. According with the treaty, the one who represents the Union in the world, the only one who can say, I am representing the European Union, is the President of the Council.
Who has no instruments. Who has very few other instruments, unfortunately.
Yes, but the representation, the political representation, the one who can go and say, I represent the European Union. Who can say that according with the treaty? The President of the European Union Council, no one else. The President of the Commission represents the Commission. But the Commission is part of the European Union. It's not the European Union, it's part of it. And it represents the Foreign Affairs Council, which is part of the European Union, but it's not the European Union. It's a puzzle, and you have to understand who is who. And this is something that not always is fully respected, because everybody tries to mark their territory. But we want to build a common foreign policy. A common doesn't mean unique. I explained it many times. Sorry, maybe some of you have heard this explanation. Once upon a time, before the euro, we had the eco, which was a common currency, but not unique. We had the peseta, and at the same time we had the eco. We built a common, but not unique. Now we are at this stage. We try to build a common, which is not unique. Each member state has its own foreign policy, and you will not prevent them from having it. I cannot prevent my colleagues from running around the world representing their foreign policy, because they have one. They have one. And I can't try to build a common one, but sometimes it's impossible, because they don't agree. And for me, it's key to abandon the unanimity rule, because the unanimity rule prevents the debate and prevents building agreements, because there is no incentive to participate in the debate. I have the veto right. I have the veto right. Without me, they cannot do anything. So I sit in my corner and I wait for them to come to buy me.
But sorry to interrupt, but you're in full flow. But the constructive abstention mechanism, which allows basically you to suggest...
Constructive abstention, if I want to abstain constructively, who obliged me to abstain constructively?
But this is something that you could suggest to outliers.
Oh yes, I can suggest. I can suggest.
And so,
does it work? I will go to Hungary and I will suggest nicely to Hungary, oh, Hungary, please, could you abstain? And Hungary say no. And then what? And then what?
Okay, but is this a useless tool? No. Or is it simply not used?
Sometimes I found moments in which a member state said, well, you know, I don't agree with that, but in fact I don't care. So since I don't care, I can abstain because I don't feel involved in it. But if I feel involved and I don't agree, I will not abstain. I will not abstain. But sometimes some member states say, well, this is not my problem. I wouldn't do that, but at the end I don't care. So I abstain. I don't want to bother you. But if he had a strong interest on the issue, he would not abstain. So it has to be some driving force for making people to debate and to create a common understanding of the thing. Because if I can block everything by just sitting in my corner and doing nothing, where is the debate? Where is the coalition? Where is the common, the middle of the way? There is no middle of the way. It's just yes or not. And this is a big difficulty, because most of the time in foreign policies is yes or not. It's yes or not. Do we call for the association council with a country which many like and others don't like? Yes or not? It requires unanimity. Then we are cooked, because just one can block everything. but this is something that has to be rethink. You are very much right. This is time to rethink how do we work. How do we work? Because this joint communication, you said, no, when the External Action Service produces something, it has to be agreed by the Commission. No. When I produce a statement as High Representative, it has to be agreed by the member states, not by the Commission, by the member states. And when we share responsibility with the Commission, we go with a joint communication, me and the Commission, because in the middle of the way, the states and the Commission. And believe me, it's not always easy. And when there is no agreement, I go alone. I go alone. Yes, this is a statement of the High Representative. Who represents the High Representative? The majority. If I don't have a majority, I don't go alone. I go alone when they don't have unanimity, but they have a strong majority. What happens? Then people look at me and criticize me, not the European Union. Oh, Mr. Borrell don't like us. It's not me, it's the majority of the European Union. So this is something that needs rethinking. MENA, Iran, double standards. I have to agree a lot. This criticism about double standards, that a lot of criticism about it, in some cases we have to accept. We have to accept. Yes, in some moments in our history, we the West people, the Western people, or us Europeans, we have not been behaving rightly, according with our values and blah, blah. And people now remember us. And when they say, one moment ago, I don't want to go in this issue, but there are many issues in which a double standard appears. And about the security in the Middle East, if we had a revived GCPOA, we would be much better. Certainly, it's not going to solve all the problems, but it would solve quite a lot. It would solve quite a lot. Because without this deal, what's going to happen? Iran will become nuclear, and the neighbors will accept Iran becoming nuclear? I doubt it. So I think that we have to continue pushing to have this agreement, even if it doesn't solve everything. Certainly not a single agreement solves everything. In Libya, in the MENA region, this idea that people are sympathetic with Ukraine, but they abstain or they leave the vote on the Security Council for reasons not related with Ukraine at all, completely different reasons, it happened. Have the list of the MENA countries or the African countries, you will see quite a lot of surprises. And you will have to ask why. And this is a complex situation. There's a lot of resentment, the anti-colonialism in Africa, the anti-Americanism in Latin America, resentment about how did we believe in times of COVID, how do we manage climate change, how do we treat the Syrian refugees, how do we treat the Ukrainian refugees. All that is being perceived by people in a different way that we perceive. And we have to look at the world with the eyes of the others. This is an exercise that could be very useful for us Europeans. We are not the only one who sets the standards of understanding the world. Others understand the world in a different way. And then the Indo-Pacific. Yes, you have just approved of our Indo-Pacific strategy. And I will be in Singapore soon in the G20 meeting. Certainly the Indo-Pacific is going to be the cradle of the history on this century. And we have been quite absent of the Indo-Pacific. 40% of our trade passes through the Strait of Malacca. 40% of our trade goes through these waters. This is the aorta vein of our economy. We have two aorta veins. One is the oil coming from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, and the other is the goods that we trade within the Pacific region. The Strait of Malacca is for us as much as important as the Suez Canal. We have to engage much more with the countries in the region. When I've been traveling there, they told me, you know, when was the last visit of a high-level official from the European Union here? Many, many years ago. So we have to engage more. That's why you have this Indo-Pacific strategy. We have to understand that China, like it or not, will become a great power. It has the mass, the dimension, it has the speed. It will create, it will be a big power. The important thing is how China is going to use this power. Is China being part of a world order based on rules, and which rules? But this is the big question that Europeans has to try to solve. How do we make our relationship with China, which I said at the beginning, the Sinatra doctrine. Huh? We are certainly much closer to Washington than to Peking. That's clear forever. But it doesn't mean that we are going to follow blindly what the Americans decided to do. Among other things, because the political pendulum of the American politics makes that one day we have Trump, the other day we have Biden, and the other day, who knows? Mm-hmm. So we have to have our own capacity to decide our policy, because not always we have the same interest as the US, although we will be closer politically and economically to Washington than to Peking. We are not equidistant. We are not equidistant, but we are not followers.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Josep. Thank you very much to all the other panelists that intervened and contributed to a very, very interesting discussion, to food for thought about the difficult situations we are living in Europe and in the rest of the world. And in the final part of the High Representative intervention, for a moment, we were within his office trying to understand the dilemmas that he has to face and he has to solve in this very difficult responsibility. We wish the High Representative a success that will be our success, and we wish him one word that he pronounced in his first intervention, political will. But as he told us, the political will of Mr. Borrell is not an individual will, it's a collective will of our leaders, of our governments, of the Commission, of the European Parliament, and at the end of all of us as Europeans. Thank you very much, Josep, and I hope to receive you again in CEPS at one moment, when you wish. Thank you very much.